Sometimes destiny waits beneath the surface, watching in silence until the right heart arrives. Abigail Carter laughed as she kicked off her shoes and ran barefoot across the smooth stones lining the riverbank, grateful to escape another warm summer afternoon. The secluded bend of the Crystal River rested nearly 3 miles from the nearest village, hidden beneath towering oak trees whose branches filtered the golden sunlight into shimmering patterns across the clear water. Few people knew this peaceful place existed, and that was exactly why Abigail loved it. Whenever the world became too noisy or expectations weighed too heavily on her shoulders as a young Omega, she came here to breathe, to think, and to remember that life could still feel wonderfully simple. She set a woven basket beneath the shade of a willow tree, placed a folded towel beside it, and smiled at the quiet beauty surrounding her. Dragonflies skimmed across the water, wildflowers swayed gently with the breeze, and birds filled the forest with cheerful songs that echoed between the distant hills. Everything felt perfectly peaceful. Without noticing the faint ripple spreading across the center of the river, Abigail stepped onto a smooth rock and leaped gracefully into the refreshing water with a joyful splash. She surfaced a moment later laughing to herself, brushing damp strands of golden hair away from her face as sunlight sparkled around her like scattered diamonds. She had no idea that only a few feet below, hidden beneath the crystal-clear current, a giant black wolf had opened its silver eyes the instant she entered the river. The enormous creature remained completely still, drifting silently beneath the surface as though it had become part of the water itself. It watched the cheerful young woman with quiet surprise instead of alarm. High above the river, people believed the Alpha King spent every waking hour surrounded by advisors, royal duties, and endless ceremonies inside the palace. No one imagined that Nathaniel Hayes sometimes escaped those responsibilities by transforming into his wolf and disappearing into the forest before sunrise. The hidden bend in the Crystal River had become the only place where he could leave behind the heavy weight of a crown and simply listen to flowing water without anyone expecting decisions or commands from him. For countless mornings he had rested beneath the cool current, where the gentle movement of the river calmed both the man and the wolf within him. Never once had another person wandered into his quiet sanctuary. Until today, Nathaniel could have slipped away the moment he sensed someone approaching. Instead, curiosity rooted him beneath the water. The young Omega showed no sign of arrogance or carelessness. She smiled at tiny fish swimming past her hands, floated peacefully while watching clouds drift across the blue sky, and occasionally laughed at nothing more than sunlight dancing across the gentle waves. There was an honesty about her that felt almost impossible to describe. She behaved exactly the same whether anyone watched or not. Suddenly, a stronger current swept around a cluster of underwater rocks, carrying Abigail several feet farther downstream than she expected. She remained calm, trying to regain her footing, unaware that the riverbed dropped sharply just beyond her next step. Before she could drift into deeper water, something enormous brushed gently against her ankle, redirecting her toward the shallower current with careful precision. Abigail steadied herself, looked around in confusion, and frowned slightly. For only the briefest instant she thought she had seen 2 brilliant silver eyes disappear beneath the surface before the river became perfectly still once again. She slowly smiled toward the quiet water. "If someone is looking after me," she whispered with grateful warmth, "thank you." Beneath the flowing river, the giant black wolf closed its eyes once more, and for reasons even the Alpha King could not yet understand, the peaceful solitude he had guarded for so long no longer felt complete unless that gentle voice was somewhere nearby. The gentle current carried tiny leaves downstream, as Abigail Carter remained standing in the shallows, unable to shake the strange feeling that someone had quietly answered her whispered words. She glanced across the sparkling river one more time before climbing onto the smooth rocks along the shore. Nothing disturbed the peaceful water except circles left behind by drifting fish and the soft breeze that danced through the willow branches overhead. She smiled at herself, deciding her imagination had simply wandered too far, yet a comforting warmth lingered in her heart as though an unseen friend had been close by. After drying her hands, she opened her woven basket and removed a fresh loaf of homemade bread, a crisp apple, and a small jar of wildflower honey prepared by an elderly neighbor. Before taking her first bite, she noticed movement near the opposite bank. Between the tall reeds stood the enormous black wolf, perfectly still, watching from a respectful distance. His silver eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight with a calm intelligence that immediately caught her attention. Abigail froze for only a heartbeat before offering a gentle smile instead of retreating. The wolf neither growled nor approached. He simply observed her with remarkable patience, almost as though he were waiting for permission to remain. Abigail slowly broke the loaf into smaller pieces and placed one on a flat stone several yards away before stepping back. "I do not know if wolves enjoy fresh bread," she said with a quiet laugh, "but it seems rude not to share lunch with someone who may have saved me." The giant wolf lowered his head slightly, surprised by the simple kindness. No one had ever spoken to him this way while he wore his true form. Soldiers feared him. Nobles admired him from a distance. Advisors obeyed him because they recognized the authority of the Alpha King. Yet this gentle Omega looked only at the lonely creature standing before her and offered him food without asking for anything in return. Nathaniel Hayes remained motionless for another moment, uncertain whether to accept the unexpected gift. Eventually, he stepped forward with measured caution, careful not to frighten her, and quietly picked up the piece of bread. Abigail watched with bright curiosity as the wolf settled beneath the shade of a nearby oak tree to eat. The sight brought an unexpected smile to her face because, despite his enormous size, he carried himself with surprising grace. "You must come here often," she said softly while sitting on the grass. "This place feels like it belongs to you." Nathaniel lifted his eyes toward her, almost startled by how close her words came to the truth. The hidden river had indeed become his sanctuary long before anyone else discovered it. They remained together in peaceful silence for several minutes, listening to the steady rhythm of flowing water and birds singing high above the trees. Neither one seemed eager to break the quiet. For the first time in many months, Nathaniel realized he was not thinking about treaties, royal councils, border disputes, or endless ceremonies waiting inside the palace. He was simply enjoying the afternoon beside someone whose kindness asked for no title and expected no reward. When the sun finally began sinking toward the western hills, Abigail carefully packed her basket and rose to leave. She looked back once before stepping onto the forest trail. "I will probably come back tomorrow," she admitted with an embarrassed smile. "If you are here again, I will bring enough bread for both of us." The wolf watched until she disappeared between the trees, and only after the sound of her footsteps faded into the forest did he quietly lift his head toward the evening sky, wondering why the promise of one ordinary tomorrow suddenly felt more valuable than every royal celebration waiting beyond the palace gates. The following afternoon arrived with brilliant blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers through the forest, and long before the church bell in the village marked the middle of the day, Abigail Carter found herself smiling as she walked the familiar trail toward the hidden bend of the Crystal River with another basket resting lightly against her arm. She laughed quietly at herself for feeling excited about seeing a wolf that she technically did not know. Yet something about the quiet companion from the day before had settled comfortably into her thoughts. When she reached the riverbank, she looked around with patient curiosity. At first, the clearing appeared empty. The water flowed peacefully over smooth stones, birds darted through the branches overhead, and sunlight shimmered across the gentle current. Abigail placed the basket beneath the willow tree anyway before sitting on the same flat rock where she had rested the previous afternoon. "I brought enough bread this time," she said with an amused smile toward the quiet forest. "Whether you are here or not, I suppose I should keep my promise." For several moments nothing happened. Then the tall grass near the opposite bank shifted almost silently, and the giant black wolf emerged from the shade with the same calm dignity that had immediately earned her trust. His silver eyes rested on her, not with caution anymore, but with unmistakable recognition. Abigail smiled as though greeting an old friend. "I was hoping you would come." Nathaniel Hayes had spent the entire morning telling himself he would not return to the river. The Royal Council expected him to review trade agreements before sunset. Visiting ambassadors waited for an audience inside the palace, and several commanders required his approval before leaving for distant border patrols. Every responsibility reminded him that an alpha king should not disappear into the forest because of simple curiosity. Yet when the afternoon sun climbed overhead, his wolf had carried him back to the crystal river almost without conscious thought. Even now, standing across from Abigail, Nathaniel could not explain why this peaceful place suddenly felt incomplete whenever she was absent. Abigail carefully placed another piece of fresh bread on the familiar stone before sitting cross-legged in the grass. This time the wolf approached without hesitation, accepting the offering before quietly settling only a few feet away. The distance between them had grown noticeably smaller, not because either one had planned it, but because trust had arrived naturally, one quiet moment after another. Abigail spoke about the little things that filled her days. The elderly baker who always slipped an extra roll into her basket, the children who chased butterflies through the village square, the tiny vegetable garden she hoped would finally grow enough tomatoes before autumn arrived, and the dream she had carried since childhood of someday finding a place where she truly belonged. Nathaniel listened to every word. No court advisor had ever spoken with such honesty. No noble family had ever shared ordinary hopes without expecting something in return. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Abigail reached into her basket once more and removed a small blue ribbon. She hesitated only briefly before tying it loosely around a low tree branch overlooking the river. "Now I will know this is our meeting place," she said softly. "If you come before I do, you will see the ribbon and know someone is looking forward to seeing you." Nathaniel lifted his eyes toward the fluttering ribbon as it danced gently in the breeze. It was such a small gesture, almost insignificant to anyone else, yet something deep within him stirred with quiet warmth. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King realized that the grand halls of the palace, with all their marble floors and golden banners, had never offered him a welcome as sincere as a simple blue ribbon tied beside a peaceful river by someone who knew nothing about the crown he carried. The blue ribbon fluttered gently above the river for the next several days, becoming a quiet promise that neither Abigail Carter nor the mysterious Black Wolf ever spoke aloud but always honored. Every afternoon, once her work in the village was finished, Abigail followed the familiar forest trail with a basket filled with simple treats, and almost every afternoon she found the giant wolf already waiting somewhere nearby, sometimes resting beneath the old oak tree, sometimes watching the flowing water from the opposite bank, yet always lifting his silver eyes the moment she arrived. Their friendship settled into a peaceful rhythm that felt as natural as the changing light across the river. Abigail no longer felt the need to fill every moment with conversation. Some days she spoke about books she had borrowed from the village schoolteacher. Other days, she simply listened to the wind moving through the leaves while the wolf rested quietly beside her. It surprised her how comforting silence could become when shared with someone who never demanded explanations. Nathaniel Hayes treasured those afternoons far more than he dared admit, but each evening, when he returned to the palace before sunset, reality reminded him who he truly was. Royal advisors filled the council chamber with reports about neighboring territories, merchants requested new trade agreements, and noble families competed for his attention with carefully prepared speeches that always seemed to hide another political ambition beneath polite smiles. Nathaniel answered every question with the calm confidence expected of an alpha king, yet more than once he caught himself staring through the palace windows toward the distant forest, wondering whether Abigail had safely returned home before nightfall. The distraction did not go unnoticed. His oldest advisor, William Ashcroft, quietly observed the change with growing curiosity. "Your Majesty," the older man remarked after one particularly long meeting, "you have looked toward the western woods at least 6 times this afternoon. Is there something there requiring additional patrols?" Nathaniel offered the slightest smile before gathering the documents from the council table. "Only a peaceful stretch of forest," he replied. "Perhaps I simply envy how quiet it must be." Although the answer sounded convincing, Nathaniel knew it was incomplete. The quiet itself was no longer what drew him back each day. It was the person waiting beside the river without knowing she had slowly become the brightest part of his routine. Determined to regain control over his thoughts, Nathaniel made a private decision. The following afternoon, he would remain inside the palace no matter how strongly his wolf wished to leave. Surely a single missed visit would remind both halves of himself where his true responsibilities belonged. The next day, he kept that promise. From morning until late afternoon, he reviewed official documents, welcomed visiting delegates, and inspected the royal gardens with remarkable discipline. As the sun slowly drifted toward the horizon, he almost believed he had succeeded. Then a palace servant quietly approached with a simple report. "Your Majesty, the gardeners noticed a storm moving toward the western forest. It may reach the river before sunset." Nathaniel's calm expression changed almost imperceptibly. He imagined Abigail walking home beneath darkening skies, perhaps waiting a little longer than usual beside the blue ribbon, wondering why her silent companion had not appeared. Before he realized what he was doing, he had already risen from his chair and dismissed the remaining meetings for the evening. Minutes later, deep within the shelter of the forest, the great black wolf raced between towering trees with effortless speed, not because duty called him there, not because instinct demanded it, but because somewhere beyond the next bend in the trail was a gentle Omega who might be waiting beside a blue ribbon, believing that friends always kept their promises. Dark clouds drifted slowly above the forest, turning the golden afternoon into a landscape painted with silver light, as Abigail Carter remained beside the crystal river longer than she normally would. She sat beneath the willow tree with her basket resting beside her, watching the blue ribbon flutter against the gathering wind. She had almost convinced herself that perhaps her quiet companion would not come today when a familiar rustle echoed through the trees. A heartbeat later, the giant black wolf emerged from the shadows, his thick coat damp from the first scattered raindrops, and his steady silver eyes finding hers with unmistakable relief. Abigail smiled so brightly that the gloomy afternoon suddenly seemed warmer. "I knew you would keep your promise," she said softly as she stood to greet him. The wolf slowed his pace until he stood only a few feet away, breathing calmly while the rain became slightly heavier around them. Nathaniel Hayes realized he had crossed nearly the entire western forest faster than ever before. The palace, the royal council, and every carefully planned responsibility now felt incredibly distant compared to this quiet moment beside the river. He had told himself he came only to make certain Abigail reached home safely before the storm arrived, yet the truth settled deeper inside him with every passing day. He no longer searched for the peaceful river. He searched for her. Abigail opened her basket and removed a folded piece of soft linen that she had packed almost without thinking that morning. She stepped closer with careful movements so she would not alarm the enormous wolf. "You are getting soaked," she said with gentle concern. "I know you probably do not mind the rain, but I do." She carefully lifted the cloth and lightly brushed the moisture from the thick fur along the top of his head and neck. Nathaniel remained perfectly still. Countless attendants had fastened ceremonial cloaks across his shoulders. Servants had polished the royal armor he wore during festivals, and physicians had treated injuries earned while protecting the kingdom, yet no simple gesture had ever touched him quite like this. There was no obligation in Abigail's kindness, no expectation, no hidden purpose. She cared only because caring came naturally to her. As the rain continued falling, Abigail noticed the wolf glance repeatedly toward the darkening sky before looking back at her. "You think I should head home, do not you?" she asked with a quiet laugh. The wolf gave the slightest nod of his great head before turning toward the narrow forest trail. Abigail blinked in surprise. "Are you going to walk with me?" Without waiting for an answer, she gathered her basket and followed. The giant wolf remained only a few steps ahead, slowing whenever the muddy path became uneven and pausing whenever low branches blocked her way. More than once Abigail found herself smiling at how strangely polite such an enormous creature could be. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the rain had faded into a light mist. The wolf stopped beneath the shelter of an old maple tree, unwilling to venture any closer where people might see him. Abigail turned back with grateful eyes. "Thank you for making sure I got home safely," she said. "I hope you know that this river does not feel lonely anymore, because you are there." She offered one final smile before disappearing down the quiet village road. Nathaniel remained beneath the maple tree until the light inside her cottage window began glowing warmly against the evening sky. Only then did he quietly turn back toward the forest. As he walked beneath the fading rain, one impossible realization echoed through both the man and the wolf alike. Somewhere between a shared loaf of bread, a blue ribbon tied to a tree, and a silent walk home through the rain. Protecting Abigail Carter had stopped feeling like a choice and had quietly become the place where his heart naturally belonged. The morning after the rain felt unusually quiet inside the royal palace. Yet Nathaniel Hayes found no peace within its towering stone walls. Every hallway echoed with polished footsteps. Every chamber overflowed with conversations about alliances, harvest reports, and preparations for the upcoming Silver Moon Festival. His advisors believed their Alpha King appeared as calm and attentive as ever, but behind his composed expression his thoughts drifted again and again toward the hidden bend of the Crystal River where a blue ribbon danced gently in the breeze. Nathaniel understood that something inside him had begun to change, and the realization unsettled him more than any challenge he had faced on the battlefield or inside the council chamber. He had allowed a simple routine to become part of his life, and routines had a dangerous way of becoming attachments. Determined to restore the balance between his heart and his responsibilities, Nathaniel reached a difficult decision before sunrise. He summoned his captain of the Royal Guard and announced that he would personally inspect the northern border settlements, a journey of nearly 60 miles that would require several days away from the capital. The advisors welcomed the decision, believing their king was once again placing duty above personal comfort. Nathaniel accepted their praise with a quiet nod, never revealing the true reason for his departure. If distance could weaken the strange connection drawing him toward the river, then leaving was the wisest choice he could make. Meanwhile, Abigail Carter followed her familiar path through the forest carrying another basket of fresh bread, apples, and wildflower tea. When she reached the willow tree, the blue ribbon still fluttered exactly where she had tied it, but the giant black wolf was nowhere to be seen. She waited without concern at first, convinced he was simply wandering deeper in the woods. She spent the afternoon reading from a worn storybook, occasionally glancing toward the trees with an encouraging smile. As the sun lowered behind the hills and the shadows grew longer, she quietly packed her basket and whispered toward the silent river. "Perhaps today was your busy day. I will come back tomorrow." The next afternoon passed much the same way. Then another. Each day Abigail returned with the same hopeful expression, greeting the empty river as though her quiet companion might appear at any moment. She never sounded disappointed, only patient. She replaced the fading blue ribbon with a new one after a strong breeze loosened the old knot, smiled at the peaceful water, and continued believing that friends always found their way back when they could. Far to the north, Nathaniel fulfilled every royal obligation exactly as planned. He visited farming communities, spoke with local families, inspected bridges damaged by spring floods, and listened carefully to the concerns of every village elder. Outwardly, he performed his duties with unwavering dedication. Yet every evening, when the final meeting ended and silence settled across the northern camp, his wolf became restless. It would stand facing south beneath the stars, ears lifted toward the distant horizon as though listening for a voice carried on the wind. Nathaniel fought the feeling with all the discipline he possessed. He reminded himself that an Alpha King belonged to an entire kingdom, not to one peaceful river or one kind-hearted Omega. But on the fourth night, after staring into the campfire long after everyone else had fallen asleep, he finally admitted a truth he could no longer deny. He did not miss the river itself. He missed the young woman who believed enough in his return to keep replacing a blue ribbon on a tree beside the water, quietly saving a place for someone she trusted would eventually find the way home. On the fifth morning, Nathaniel Hayes stood alone on a rocky overlook near the northern border as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the valleys below, yet the breathtaking view failed to quiet the growing restlessness inside him. The villages he had visited were thriving, the bridges had been repaired, the harvest looked promising, and every responsibility that had brought him north had been completed successfully. By every measure, his journey had been worthwhile. Even so, the feeling that had followed him since leaving the Crystal River refused to disappear. Each evening his wolf had wandered to the edge of the camp, staring south with unwavering determination, and each sunrise the longing only grew stronger. Nathaniel had spent days convincing himself that distance would loosen the invisible thread connecting him to the peaceful river and the kind-hearted Omega waiting beside it. Instead, every mile seemed only to make that thread stronger. Late that afternoon, as the royal party prepared for the journey back to the capital, Nathaniel quietly dismissed the guards for a brief walk through the surrounding forest. The moment he stepped beyond the last line of trees, he allowed the familiar transformation to wash over him. Within moments, the great black wolf stood beneath the towering pines, breathing deeply as the wind carried countless scents across the mountains. Then, beneath the fragrance of cedar and wild grass, another scent reached him, faint yet unmistakable. It was the gentle scent of wildflowers and fresh bread that had become forever linked to Abigail Carter in his memory. Impossible as it seemed from nearly 60 miles away, his wolf immediately lifted its head toward the south. Nathaniel closed his eyes in disbelief. "This cannot be instinct alone," he whispered to himself. Yet before he could finish the thought, his powerful legs were already carrying him through the forest with effortless speed. He crossed winding trails, shallow streams, and rolling hills as daylight slowly faded into evening. Every mile that disappeared beneath his paws made the strange pull inside him stronger instead of weaker. Meanwhile, Abigail once again arrived at the Crystal River carrying a fresh loaf of bread and another blue ribbon. The previous ribbon had weathered several windy afternoons and now fluttered in faded shades beneath the willow tree. She carefully untied it and replaced it with a brighter one before sitting quietly beside the water. She no longer expected the wolf to appear every day, yet she still found comfort simply being there. Looking toward the peaceful current, she smiled softly. "I hope wherever you are, you found what you needed," she whispered. "If you ever come back, you will still find me here." The evening breeze carried her words across the quiet river. Minutes later, somewhere deep within the western forest, the giant black wolf suddenly stopped running. His silver eyes lifted toward the familiar scent growing stronger with every heartbeat. Before him, the trees slowly opened to reveal the hidden bend of the Crystal River glowing beneath the setting sun. Nathaniel had traveled nearly 60 miles in a single determined journey, not because anyone had ordered him to return, not because royal duty demanded it, and not because his wolf had lost control. He had returned because every step away from Abigail had quietly taught him one undeniable truth. The river had never been the destination drawing him home. She had been. As the first stars appeared above the forest, Abigail looked up after hearing soft footsteps behind her. She turned slowly toward the familiar sound, and standing at the edge of the clearing once again was the great black wolf, breathing calmly beneath the fading light, as though no distance in the world had ever been great enough to keep him away from her for long. Abigail Carter could not hide her smile as the great black wolf stepped quietly into the fading light, his silver eyes reflecting the first stars appearing above the Crystal River. She did not rush toward him or ask where he had been. Instead, she walked the final few steps with the same calm trust she had shown since the day they first met, and gently rested her hand against the thick fur along his shoulder. "You came back," she whispered with quiet relief. "I knew you would." Nathaniel Hayes lowered his head slightly beneath her touch, feeling a sense of peace that no royal celebration had ever given him. He realized that throughout his journey to the northern border, he had searched for an explanation that would allow him to dismiss what had grown between them as nothing more than the instinct of his wolf. Yet standing beside Abigail once again, every excuse quietly disappeared. His wolf had not chosen this place on its own. His own heart had led him here long before he was willing to admit it. The evening passed in comfortable silence as they walked together along the riverbank. Abigail spoke softly about the days he had been gone, telling him how the village children had asked why she continued visiting the river even when no one seemed to be waiting there. She smiled as she recalled her answer. "Because kindness is never wasted," she said. "Sometimes showing up is enough, even if nobody else knows why." Nathaniel listened to every word, knowing she had unknowingly described exactly what she had become in his life. Before long, the distant sound of ceremonial bells drifted through the forest from the direction of the capital. The Silver Moon Festival was only 2 days away, and the entire kingdom would soon gather before the royal palace. Nathaniel slowly lifted his head toward the sound. A decision that had quietly formed during his long journey finally settled with complete certainty. He could no longer allow Abigail to remain only a secret known by the river and the trees. She deserved to stand in the light, never hidden behind his silence or the shape of a wolf. The following morning, Nathaniel returned to the palace before sunrise and resumed his human form inside his private chambers. His closest advisor, William Ashcroft, immediately noticed the remarkable calm that had replaced the uncertainty of previous weeks. "Your Majesty," William said carefully, "you appear to have found the answer you were searching for." Nathaniel looked toward the eastern windows where the first light touched the palace gardens and smiled with quiet confidence. "I have," he replied, "and I have spent far too long pretending it was a question of instinct." Later that afternoon, royal messengers departed in every direction to deliver invitations for the upcoming Silver Moon Festival. Among the carefully sealed letters was one addressed to Abigail Carter. She accepted the elegant envelope with complete surprise when it arrived at her cottage. Inside was a simple invitation bearing the royal seal requesting her presence as an honored guest at the festival. Abigail read the letter twice, unable to imagine why the Alpha King himself would invite an ordinary young Omega from a quiet village. She glanced toward the forest where the hidden river rested beyond the trees and smiled to herself. "I wish I could ask you what this means," she quietly told the absent wolf. Far away inside the palace, Nathaniel stood upon the grand balcony overlooking the city preparing for the celebration. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he was not planning a speech about strength, victory, or royal tradition. Instead, he was preparing to tell an entire kingdom the simple truth that one gentle Omega beside a peaceful river had taught both the man and the wolf how to find their way home. The Silver Moon Festival transformed the royal capital into a sea of glowing lanterns, cheerful music, and hopeful faces as families gathered beneath the evening sky to celebrate another peaceful year. Abigail Carter walked carefully through the palace gates with the invitation still safely tucked inside her small handbag, feeling both honored and uncertain about why she had been summoned. Everything around her seemed impossibly grand, from the marble staircases to the banners dancing above the courtyards. Yet despite the beauty surrounding her, she found herself quietly wondering whether the giant black wolf had returned to the Crystal River that morning. Her thoughts were interrupted when a royal attendant approached with a respectful bow and invited her to stand near the front of the gathering. Confused but trusting, Abigail followed without asking questions. Moments later, the ceremonial trumpets echoed across the palace square as Nathaniel Hayes stepped onto the grand balcony overlooking thousands of citizens. Dressed in royal blue with the ancient crest of the Alpha Kings embroidered across his cloak, he carried every bit of the dignity expected from his position, yet his eyes searched only one face among the crowd. When he found Abigail standing quietly below, a calm smile appeared that only she seemed able to inspire. After thanking the people for another season of peace and prosperity, Nathaniel paused longer than anyone expected. The square fell completely silent. "For many years," he began, "I believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. I believed a king must hide every weakness, every fear, and every quiet hope behind duty." His voice remained steady as he continued. "Then, beside a peaceful river hidden deep within our western forest, someone reminded both the man and the wolf within me that true strength is found in kindness freely given." Gentle murmurs spread through the crowd as Nathaniel slowly descended the palace steps instead of remaining above them. He walked directly toward Abigail until only a few feet separated them. She looked at him with surprise, recognizing something strangely familiar in his silver eyes. Nathaniel smiled warmly before speaking softly enough for her alone to hear. "The friend who waited beside the river never truly left." Abigail's eyes widened as countless quiet memories suddenly fit together like pieces of a forgotten song. The calm silver eyes, the silent protection beneath the water, the thoughtful walks through the forest, and the comforting presence that had always made her feel safe. Nathaniel gently took her hand. "My wolf found you first," he said with quiet honesty. "But it was my heart that chose to return, again and again. I kept telling myself it was instinct. I know now it was simply love finding its way home." Turning back toward the gathered kingdom without letting go of her hand, Nathaniel spoke with complete confidence. "Today I stand before you not only as your Alpha King, but as a man grateful for the kindness of one remarkable Omega. Titles may command respect, but compassion earns trust. She never knew who I was. She offered friendship expecting nothing in return, and that gift changed me forever. The crowd answered with warm applause that echoed across the palace grounds, not because of royal tradition, but because sincerity needed no explanation. Later that evening, after the celebration slowly faded into peaceful conversation, Nathaniel and Abigail returned together to the crystal river where the blue ribbon still danced gently beneath the willow tree. The giant black wolf emerged once more from the quiet forest and rested peacefully beside them beneath the starlit sky. Abigail smiled as she looked from the wolf to Nathaniel and back again, no longer seeing two different beings, but two parts of the same gentle soul. Nathaniel looked across the calm water where their story had quietly begun and whispered, "I do not need to hide beneath the river anymore, because the place I searched for was never a place at all. It was always you." The river continued flowing beneath the moonlight, carrying its quiet song toward tomorrow, while the blue ribbon fluttered gently in the evening breeze as a lasting reminder that the strongest destinies often begin with the smallest acts of kindness.